Welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Reuben Langdon. Reuben Langdon is the voice actor for Ken Masters. He's a stuntman, and he also has worked extensively on EDs.
Thanks for having me.
Well, perfect. Well, yeah, so how did your career start? How did you get involved in acting and in stunt work?
I guess an unlikely start. I guess most people who are in the film industry sort of are in the acting business from a young age and enjoy acting and drama and being in front of the camera, and that was not me. I was the shyest kid in school and hated being in front of a big group and just dreaded. I didn't even like going to parties because I just felt, like there was just too much going on and I didn't want to be seen. So in high school. So I moved to Japan when I was 19, just out of curiosity and a fascination with Japanese culture and anime and, the otaku culture. I was pretty much an otaku. We didn't have that phrase. Are you familiar with the otaku phrase? You know what that means?
I'm actually not. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, it's a Japanese word, and a lot of in the anime world they've adopted it. And it's sort of like a comic book geek or a nerd, sort of like a Trekkie, if the old Star Trek conventions. Before it was popular, right? This was these people who went to these conventions were sort of extreme in their dressing up and everything, and now it's become sort of a mainstream pop culture Comic-Con event that everybody loves to do it. It's a cool thing, so you're kind of cool when you do that. But back in my day when I was doing this stuff, it was not the cool thing to do at all. You were considered, a nerd, a geek, an outcast of society. So I was very much one of these guys that just, loved his comics and his anime and was very much secluded from the rest of society and not wanting to go out and be a part of that world, the real world, I guess. And I moved to Japan just out of curiosity and interest, and out of a means to sort of pay the bills and put food in my mouth, I signed up with some modeling agencies out there. Everybody was saying because I was a white guy and they used white people in commercials, various commercials and catalogs and modeling things, that I could make some money doing it. And I was like, all right, whatever I can do to pay the bills. And I remember just dreading it. But after a couple of jobs and a couple of paychecks, I'm like, all right, well, maybe this isn't so bad. And then the modeling thing was paying the bills. But then I started really enjoying the process of filmmaking and being in front of the camera and that process. So I'd been fascinated with Jackie Chan and, the Hong Kong films, Jet Li. Bruce Lee was a childhood idol, still is an idol of mine. I got into acting school out in Japan, and then right when I enrolled in the school, an opportunity for an audition came up for they were looking for a white guy in or not, I shouldn't say just a white guy, but they were looking for a role for a high school exchange student to be in one of Japan's, they call it the tokusatsu, the sort of like the Power Ranger and Kamen Rider type shows. And they needed a foreigner, so to say, or someone to play a foreigner. And I went to the audition, and I booked the role, and I got my first day on the job was, I remember it was my 21st birthday, and I got to transform into a superhero and beat up guys in rubber suits, and had such an amazing time. And I sort of set my intention on that day. I remember saying that this is great. I love this. This is what I want to do the rest of my life. And to some form or fashion, pretty much that's what I've been doing, for the past 20 years, is beating up guys in rubber suits, whether it's on the actual Power Ranger show or in video games or, you know, transforming into superheroes and beating up the bad guys. It's kind of what I do for a living.
And how did you get your start as a stuntman? Like, how did the work in Japan, how did that translate to doing stunt work in the United States?
Right. So I on that show, it was a pretty stunt-heavy show, especially for Japan. There's a lot of action, fighting, martial arts, you know, flying through the air, wire work. And that was so much fun for me. I'd been, like I said, a big fan of martial arts cinema since a young age, never actually thinking I could do it myself. I was sort of, you know, I was a nerd growing up. Sports was the last thing I wanted to do. And, but then as I got the opportunity to sort of do it a little bit on the show, I realized how much fun it was. And it was challenging because I hadn't had that background or that experience. So I had to train extra hard to make it look good. But the guys on the show, the time it was Japan Action Club, I think it's now called Japan Action Enterprise, Chiba Shinichi or Sonny Chiba, it was his school at the time. And they really took a liking to me. They sort of took me under their wing, and they said, hey, if you want to come and train with us, we train every Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so I just started training with those guys and really loved the process. And that actually became almost more of a focus than the acting itself. It was just really trying to physically get my body to do those moves, to be able to execute these precision moves and do choreography and sword fighting and all that stuff. So I really focused hard after that show. I continued my training, and I continued hanging out with those guys for another 4 years in Japan. And then I sort of was getting better and better, and was able to do some tricks on the trampoline and do some things, and you know, do some fight choreography. Not great, but enough where I thought it was sort of time to take my newfound skills out to the big world. And those guys told me about Power Rangers, and they said, yeah, there's sort of their classmates, people that they've worked with, are actually doing all the action and stunts on Power Rangers in the States, even though it's the American version is taken from the Japanese show, but they still hired all the Japanese stunt guys. So that was sort of my door into coming to America and working in America, and the American stunt industry was the Japanese connection that I had already had. So it was great because I was working on the show as one of the stuntmen on the show.
I think that there's well, you probably have heard this more than I necessarily have, but there might be a perception, I think, amongst at least American audiences that, oh, you know, stunt work, it's not that dangerous because there's all these green screens and so much of it is computer generated when it actually happens on film. Is that actually the case, or is stunt work actually dangerous, or can be dangerous?
Well, it certainly has gotten a lot safer over the years. That there is the introduction of green screen and CGI, and there is less of a need to destroy oneself, so to say, or to go full on, you know, and do the crazy, dangerous stunts. That's just not as needed as much. However, you have certain directors and filmmakers who are constantly pushing the limits and want to do things the old school way, which still happens. So, and there's still dangers. I mean, Michael Bay, how many people has he crippled or killed on his films? So it's not all green screen. It's not all that, and you know, it's not all that safe. There's still a huge danger factor when it comes to stunts, and even the simple things. You know, all my major injuries have come from just the simplest, stupidest little things. You know, tearing an ACL, you know, breaking bones, and these kinds of things happen on the easy stuff. So it's yes, it's definitely with technology and incorporating technology, it's getting safer, but it's still highly challenging, highly, very dangerous and not so simple.
I mean, I know that in the past year or so, I mean, there was a stunt person who died. I think it was a stunt woman who died on the set of Deadpool 2. And I also know that
Right.
Tom Cruise broke his ankle during Mission Impossible 6. And I just thought it was interesting to hear all this news come out. And I was like, wow, I mean, really, I mean, I feel like, I mean, I'm a huge fan of film. Like, I watch a lot of films and
Mm-hmm.
I go to theaters often, but I don't actually know much about the industry and making films itself. But just my own common belief was that, oh yeah, with all the new, with all the integration or the more of the integration of CG and, just less things that are happening on screen actually being with real people, at least with big action films, I thought it was, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like stunt people are in less dangerous positions. Then I heard about that stunt person dying and Tom Cruise's injury, and I was like, oh, I guess that must not be the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I mean, you look at blockbuster films now, look at all the crazy stuff that's happening. It's just unbelievable how, how many explosions and crazy things. So if you were to do all that practically, then forget about it. There's no way in without modern aid of technology that you'd be able to pull any of that stuff off. Not any of it, but a lot of it. But even still, when you're this integration, there's just so many factors involved, when just simple stuff. And that's why you don't have the actors doing it, because you have, a big actor like Tom Cruise breaks his ankle. That pushes the whole production of everything. Everything has to be reorganized, switched around, and that's a lot of money involved. But when you have so many people on those big productions, those big shows, so it's getting better. And I even heard that Disney now has robots that are doing a lot of the really crazy wire gags, and which is great. The less injuries, the less we have exposed people to these dangerous things. As a stunt person, and I've seen this a lot in the stunt industry, people are like, yeah, I want to do that. That's great. Yeah, I want to be able to, fly through the air and do all these cool things. And yeah, it's cool when you can do it, but you have to remember that every time you are on a wire, every time you put fire on your body, your chances of having an injury or even death, you're putting yourself in that position. And we have technology, we have equipment, we have fire gels, we have, wires and pulleys and different things to keep the danger factors as low as possible. But it's just a matter of, factors and timing and variables before something goes wrong and somebody gets hurt or somebody even dies.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I wanted to move on to a subject that's maybe at least a little safer to produce, and that's your voice acting work. So I guess which
Sure.
came first? Did Ken Masters from Street Fighter or Dante? Which came first? I know both games obviously are created by Capcom. Did they was it coincidence that you did both, or was it they brought you in to do one and then they loved you and then they signed you up for the other one? What was that process like?
Yeah, so my doorway, everybody has a different story, especially in the voice acting world, how they got involved in it. And a lot of people, again, from a young age, really tuned and trained and wanted to be voice actors, so that's what they did. I kind of fell into it literally through the role of Dante. I did the motion capture first. I booked the role as a physical performer doing the motion capture work. And they were holding a second audition after the fact, after we did the motion capture work for the voices. And because I had done the motion capture, they invited me to the audition. They were like, hey, Reuben, you want to give this a shot? And I said, yeah, of course. I want to be able to do all of it as much as I can and not just be the physical guy. Went to the audition. They said, okay, you're lacking, a lot of technique when it comes to mic techniques and those things, but we could probably work around that. But we like your voice and your performance is there. So let's give you the job. So I got the job as Dante, the voiceover part, as well as the motion capture, but at that time it was separate. Now they're doing what's called full performance capture, so they're recording it all at the same time. But back then, 10 plus years ago, the full performance capture thing wasn't a thing. So that got my foot in the door after that role, sort of got my foot in the door in the voiceover world with all the voiceover folks and the casting people and the directors and whatnot. And so I started going out auditioning for various voiceover projects. And when Ken Masters came along, it was just another audition at the time. I freaked out at the audition because I was a huge Street Fighter fan. But when the audition came along, it was just like I just got a call from another casting person and said, hey, come read for a role. And so that was, I'm sure the guys over at Capcom probably recognized my voice and said, oh, this is the guy that does Dante, and that maybe helped their decision in making and selecting me for Ken. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that, but yeah, it was just for Ken. It was just a straight up audition and then getting selected for the role. And here we are several years later, still playing that.
When you did the voice, that role. When you initially did the voice for both of these characters, I mean, I guess from the outside perspective, maybe people, they've heard, voice actors do interviews before, like Hank Azaria or something like that, and they just think, oh, these voices, these are just voices that the voice actor could always do. This was a sound that, he could just make naturally, and he didn't have to work on it. It was just a funny voice he would joke with. Is that really the case? Like when you did the performance for both of those characters, I mean, was there, I guess, what was the direction like to actually get to that end result where you sound like, okay, this is where I want to be?
Well, it's, everything starts with the script. So you sort of read the script and you get an idea of what's on the paper and then how to, I sort of digest that and as a performer and give it my best shot. And then that's the producers and the directors. They, that's how they make the selections through the audition process. Is they look at everybody who gives it their best shot, and they're like, oh, well, this person is as close to what we had in mind, and then obviously we can, with direction, we can tweak it how we really want to go, make it more specific this way or that way. So then usually once we're in the booth, then they're like, okay, we love what you did at the audition here. Do it just like that. But now add a little of this or a little of that, or take away what you did there. We didn't like that part. And it's like baking a cake. You're adding a little ingredients and taking away, adding, and it's just that constant sort of chiseling away, sculpting until everybody is happy with the way things are going. And then once you find the character, everybody knows what that character is, then it's just a matter of just keeping that up, staying in that character. And that's, luckily I've had those few roles like Ken and Dante and Chris Redfield over the years, doing the motion capture side, where Capcom trusts my delivery of the performance, so they keep calling me back, and they know that I'm going to give, this is how I deliver it, and they sort of know that, and there's a trust factor there, and we have fun, every time we go in to the booth or back on the motion capture stage. It's sort of like kind of putting on an old pair of shoes and feeling it out, and like, yep, I know how these fit, and I know what I can do and what I can't do here, and let's just do it.
One thing that I've wondered, I guess, for voice actors' work is is every sound that you make for them, right? Every sound that you make for a character for them, do you, I guess, are they allowed to use it without your permission in the sense that, like, when you, let's say, you say the word Hadouken, right? Which obviously you've probably
Right.
said that to death. Like, is each game
Yeah.
that appears in, do they have to get permission from you, or do you have to come back and re-record it, or is it, basically they just paid you the one time for it for that particular game, and then they can use that for future video game adaptations. And one of the reasons why I asked this is that I'm sure you're far more familiar with this case than I am, but at least I've personally heard of this. Is that I know for Crispin Glover, when he was in Back to the Future 1, then I know that there were some disputes between him and Robert Zemeckis and Spielberg. And then when they did the second Back to the Future, they didn't bring him back. But what they had done was that they made a mold of his face, and that they used
Hmm.
that mold on another actor's body in Back to the Future 2. And even though the character, he's upside down, but he still has that mold on his face. And I'm pretty sure he got into a legal dispute, I think, with Universal. Or there was some legal dispute that happened. And from what my understanding is, I might be totally
Right.
wrong, that basically you can't use the likeness of an actor without their consent, I guess, or without paying them. Is it the same case with voice actors? Or am I totally wrong?
Well, it all depends on the contract. Everything is contractual, how you worked it out, and that's why there's a million lawyers in Hollywood because of copyright issues and how it all works out. So typically in a union job, if you're just looking at the base union rules, and then this all changes depending on, what if you're a bigger name, you have lawyers and different contract negotiations and all these things. But a typical union project is, it's sort of, you can use, so for example, Street Fighter was a union job. So when I recorded for Street Fighter 4, that was it. And then if there's another Street Fighter 5, they have to bring me back to re-record all the lines. Even if they were wanting to use old lines from the previous games, they wouldn't be allowed contractually. They'd have to re-record them. Or if they wanted to reuse them, they could reuse them, but they had to pay a fee. And then the fee that they would pay would go to the union, and the union would then cut me a check, sort of like a residual type use. So, and this varies case by case. And since then, the union, there was a strike for voiceover actors. I don't know if you were aware of this a couple years ago, and new contracts have been made, and now, everything changes per project, per union contract. It's always changing, and so it's hard to give you a blanket statement, but just in general, typically for these projects, they kind of re-record. So even though I said Shoryuken 10 million times, I remember getting called in to, I think it was a Shoryuken or it was a Hadouken or something. Literally one line. I just recorded one line and went home for the day. And I got a new contract because it was cheaper for them to bring me in to say that one time than to reuse it, to pay the reuse rights, because of the way the legalities and the everything else. It just would have been a lot cheaper for them to have me come in and re-record it than for them to go through the other process. And this is, again, case by case. Does that answer your question?
No, I think it definitely does. I mean, again, just speaking as a layperson, so to speak, I feel like when it comes to voiceover work, I think that there might be a perception amongst the general population that they don't really put much thought into it. When they see, a big animated film, and let's say, whatever, there's a really big famous actor like Tom Hanks playing Woody in Toy Story, for example. I don't think that they really put much thought into the acting side of it or the legality side when it comes to the more like, the primarily voice actors that, play the voice of, for example, Toy Story 1, Sid, or, just a person that's not necessarily a household name or a famous, I don't know, I don't want to call him like visual actor, but, a non-voice actor.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that, I think that a lot of people just have the assumption it's, don't you just go into a booth and you just talk for, a day and you do all the work and then that's it. So, yeah, no, that's why I wanted to ask you
Well,
about that, just to get a little bit more information.
yeah, it depends on the project. But yeah, trust me, there's a lot of thought that goes behind these things, from casting to the role to the type of, to the lines, to the dialogue, to the way it's delivered in the direction. There's just so much to it. And I'm sure there's a lot of behind the scenes, out there, on YouTube or whatever, on DVD box sets and those things that go into the makings of the behind the scenes. But yeah, I recommend anybody who's interested in this stuff to go check out as many behind the scenes making ofs as possible, because it is an elaborate process.
So as we alluded to earlier, you've done some other work too, and one of the projects that you've worked on is Citizen Hearing, and your work in the truth community. And I guess I was just interested in, what is Citizen Hearing? How would you describe it? And yeah, if you wouldn't mind talking about that for a few minutes or so.
Yeah, the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure was an event. So you mentioned in the introduction a movie, but it actually was not a movie, not yet. There's kind of been one in the works for a long time, but it was a 5-day event. What I forget, was it March or April to May 2013? Happened at the National Press Club, and there were over 40 witnesses, mostly ex-government and military folks, testifying to 6 former members of Congress, 1 senator, to the fact that the human race is being engaged by an extraterrestrial presence. And the event was produced by myself, and I had a couple other partners, and we filmed the whole thing, documented the 40 plus hours of testimony, or I should say 30 plus hours of testimony, and shot a lot of behind the scenes that one day, hopefully, funding and whatnot comes through, we can finish our movie. But yeah, it was an amazing event. It was sort of a similar type thing Stephen Greer did back in 2001, called the Disclosure Project, which was a 2-hour press conference at the National Press Club, and we basically took that, put it on steroids times a million, and did the 5-day event, and actually had former Congress members involved, who by the end of the 5-day testimony were all absolutely convinced, because they saw the evidence and they heard the testimony. Strange is going on in the human races. We're being engaged by something, because we had we had heads of SAC nuke bases, former defense minister of Canada, pilots, military pilots. We had even South American military pilots, just people from all over, just talking about all the crazy experiences that they've had on the record. And we also, in addition to their testimony, we had actual, declassified documents from the Freedom of Information Act that actually go into their experiences, and that, describe some of these SAC nuke bases that have been had been shut down, and large black discs hovering over their bases while they've been shut down, and even activated without their consent. Just machines starting up on their own, and again simultaneously having huge black or saucer objects floating above the base. So this is documented testimony, experienced military people with high rank and tenure, and also high educated people. So these are people that know about, pilots that know about weather, extreme weather phenomenons and strange anomalies and these kinds of things, and they yet are still going on the record to talk about these things. So yeah, that's, in a nutshell, that's the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure.
Well, what what type of aliens do you think are most likely to be real? In fact, I mean, I know that there's a lot of different types. You know, there's the Greys, there's the Reptilians, there's the Nordics, there's the Anunnakis. I know, or Anunnaki. I know that that's kind of been a bigger buzzword recently. Which of those ones do you think are most likely to be accurate?
We didn't really go into types or species in the actual hearings. We just focused more on the provable factual events and phenomenon. We did have one or two folks who said they actually saw physical beings, but for the most part, the focus was just to talk about the actual physical anomalies as far as discs and craft and going at extreme speeds and the secrecy behind it and the government cover up and these kinds of things. So if you're looking for factual evidence of physical beings, there is very little of that actually that I've seen. So for me to talk about different beings would be going into my other series, which is called Interview with Ed, Extra Dimensionals. And that's a little more, less grounded, I should say, in factual evidence and more of just personal testimony and people's experiences and their interactions with these beings that they claim and make claims for what they're interacting with. So based on that series and based on the testimony, non-physical evidence, there's a whole slew of different beings out there, the Anunnaki from Zacharias Sitchin's work, the Sumerian cultures, they're sort of mentioned there. So it's translations of ancient texts, so obviously a lot can get misinterpreted and fuzzy. So I guess I should ask you, do you want to go into that woo-woo stuff, or are you looking for just factual stuff, or how do you just want my personal opinion? Because I'm not sure what your audience, if they're ready to go full deep into the peanut butter or really just...
I mean, you might as well. I mean, now that you've kind of
What,
teased
what's
us
your
with
take?
the information. You can say what you believe.
Oh, no, I absolutely believe. I've had my personal experiences as well. But, it's one thing to say I believe, and it's then another to show actual evidence to someone to convince them. So I'll just say this is, my disclaimer. This is all just personal experience, and the citizen hearing is a fact. That's really where it's kind of the ABCs of ufology, and I point people to that who may just be coming onto this information, who may be curious. There's a lot of factual evidence presented in the 40 hours of testimony. We have radar records, we have declassified documents, we have witness testimony, and when you put all of that together, then you really have, the big picture starts to come in to play, which is absolutely, without a doubt, the human race is being engaged by some sort of higher intelligence. Now, going to the next level, and this is where it's more of a personal experience, and I don't have factual basis to support any of this, really. It's just my own experiences and talking to other people and their experiences. And yeah, several races. The Mantids, I've had experiences with them. The Greys, the Palladians, the Octurians. There's some people say there's hundreds of races that have interacted with humanity at different points of time in history, and currently probably another 20 or so that's actively engaging humanity right now. But yeah, which one do you want to go down? Which path do you want to go down there from there?
Well, I guess. Well, you said you yourself, you've had personal experiences, or a personal experience, who, I guess, what was that experience like, and which of the kind? I mean, at least from my understanding, again, I mean, I haven't necessarily delved super deep into this, but my understanding are
Right.
the grays are the ones that I think maybe most people think about. They're the gray, you know,
Right.
humanoid type, you know, not kind of featureless. Most times, at least I've seen them depicted, you know, they're mostly naked looking. Yeah, there's obviously the
Right.
reptilians, and that's a lot of David Icke's work. Is, you know, there's, you know, the talk about the monarchy, or at least the British monarchy being reptilians, and, you know, it's the idea that the
Right.
reptilians are shapeshifters. I know them. The Nordics, I'm a little less familiar with. From maybe I might be incorrect here, but I heard about their interaction with General Byrd when he went to Antarctica. Maybe I'm confusing the stories, but at least that's what I heard that he
Yep.
encountered. They were like blonde hair, blue eyes, kind of Aryan type. And then the Anunnaki,
Right.
I'm
Right.
not too certain about, but that's about as far as my depth of knowledge goes.
That's that. No, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, it's once you go deeper down the rabbit hole, there are several offshoots of just like the human race has. How many different types of humans do we have on our planet? So within the reptilian race, there are thousands of different types of offshoots of reptilians. Within the grays as well, there's several types of different kinds of grays that have interacted. At least people claim that they have interacted with us, with humanity, and not all one type. So there are, the Arcturian types in the Palladian and the Nordics tend to be a little more ethereal in sense. The mantis, I didn't have a physical contact, but it was more of like a mental download, so to say. I was sort of sleeping in bed or not sleeping in bed, but had to go to bed because I was feeling really, just a lot of weird energy going on, and my body started shaking. And in bed, I just got a zap, so to say, a download of information that I had to unpack and digest and figure out for a few hours. The sort of experience went on, and that was from the mantis being. So we all are sort of used to our physical reality in a physical sense, but when we start diving into quantum physics and understanding sort of holographic universe theories, we know that there's a lot of different realms, potential timelines, other realities that we may or may not be. Mainstream science hasn't quite figured out how this all works, but is definitely getting a good idea of the holographic universe and multiple timelines and quantum realities, quantum possibilities. And I think a lot of these experiences that people are having, the reason why they are so individualized and we don't have tangible evidence is because it's more of in those other realms, in these sort of higher frequency quantum possibilities. And unless you're sort of tuned to the frequency of that reality, you're not going to experience it. And as a collective human race, this is why we haven't collectively been able to experience all of these things. There's obviously been events like the Phoenix Flights where, several thousand people saw this event, this giant boomerang craft fly over Phoenix in 1997. There are collective events like that, and, the military having their run-ins with these different craft and whatnot. But on an individual base, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are having experiences in their own realms, so to say. A lot of times like in a dream-like state, or sort of like I had with I guess the best thing to say is kind of like a dream. I had to go lay down, and then I just got all this information, and I had a conversation. It was a very vivid dream. It was very much, I remember it very clear even to this day, but probably not a tangible physical experience, and that's why we don't have physical evidence of these interactions as much as the bigger craft type experiences. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, from your own, I guess, experience and just talking to other people about this, Do you feel like most people that have these kind of encounters with aliens, or extraterrestrials, do you feel like, is it a negative feeling or vibe that people get from this? Because I've heard some, I guess, you'd call them abduction stories or at least encounters, where it truly
Hmm.
sounds horrifying, or it sounds like a horror film, where people can't move,
Sure.
they're on a bed,
Right.
and it sounds very terrifying. Do you, from just your own experiences talking to other people, are they more negative leaning, or is it more in the middle, or positive, or?
Well, based on the evidence and the interactions of the various people that I've come in contact with, I've probably talked to and interviewed few hundred different people who've had encounters. And I would say out of the hundreds, maybe 10 of them have been negative experiences. Or out of the 100, maybe 50 to 80, in the beginning, they were perceived as negative experiences because there was a lot of fear around what was going on because it was so unusual and different. But once they were able to sort of relax into it and realize that there wasn't a nefarious intent, that it was just sort of a mission, so to say, or they were sort of doing their thing, but then they could shift their perspective and see, oh, okay, here's the reason why. Maybe it's not so malevolent. So, so I think based on my personal interviews and my experiences and talking with people, I think overall the phenomenon is a positive one. That's not to say that negative ones don't exist. I just think they are less likely to happen than the positive. Less likely to happen than the positive ones. And obviously the media and you just watch the news and you can tell right away the fear sells. Scary stuff sells. We love our horror movies. We love to go and get scared out of our pants. And so the stories, the sort of fear-based stories, are the ones that are going to come to the surface and people are going to watch and see and hear about before the other ones, even though the evidence and everything else points to a benevolent type experience.
Do you think that, can you foresee it happening in your lifetime, or let's say over the next 50 years, could you foresee some of these races making themselves publicly known? Doing something like, I mean, there's the, talk of, oh, why don't they land on the White House lawn or land in the middle of Times Square or something like that. But could you foresee a situation happening in the not too distant future where they actually do reveal themselves publicly, at least to an extent?
No, they already have. I don't know if you've been following the To the Stars Academy and every. I mean, they've done this for years, hundreds of years. And if you look at, Ancient Aliens obviously sensationalizes a lot of stuff and tries to make everything out to be an alien, but they still do show a lot of credible evidence that shows, humanity's been engaged in, for hundreds of years, but going back to old cultures and societies who. So as I was saying, the To the Stars Academy is been releasing. So far, they've released 3 videos that have come officially from the Pentagon, from the former research group inside the Pentagon that was funded by Senator Harry Reid, and a couple other senators, and it was sort of a top secret program, one of many. But that one has now been declassified, and Lou Elizondo, who was head of that program, has been on all the mainstream media. New York Times, this was December 16th last year, New York Times did a front page piece on it. It's been on all, Fox News, NBC. The pilots of the craft, or of the planes in those videos, have come out and done separate interviews saying that, they didn't know what it was. And in one of the videos, there was a whole fleet of these extra, well, we would just say UFOs, because they didn't know, they weren't claiming to say they knew what race or where they're from, but they were definitely not from this reality. Not even from another country with way more advanced technology, because the types of maneuvers that these craft are able to do would basically kill anybody inside. The G-forces would just absolutely mangle any human that if it was based on technology that we had here. So there's very advanced technologies where they're able to warp space and time and gravity and do phenomenal maneuvers. And this has all been, now it's a mainstream talking point. I mean, if you just Google Fox News UFO, you'll get Tucker Carlson talking about this last week, talking to Nick Pope about that program, that specific program. That's one of the first programs from the U.S. side. Now, other countries have declassified their programs, and it's been investigated, and there's a lot of evidence that's been seen. And the reason it's not a mainstream talking point kind of baffles my mind every day. I'm like, this is like the biggest thing. And even Tucker said it. It's funny. He said, yeah, this is like the biggest thing to happen to humanity. Why aren't more people talking about this? And I asked the same question. It's like, this is when I started over 10 years ago, when I started coming across this information, had my own experiences. I first saw craft out in the sky before I had my Mantis experience. And I was like, what the hell? What, this stuff's real? And then started diving into the research and seeing that all of the evidence and all of the stuff that's been going on over the years, and the fact that it's been subdued and not talked about, and the waters are so dirty with disinformation as well. It's a shame. It's a shame that humanity is not woken up to the fact that we aren't alone in the universe. We're not alone on our own planet. And there is ample enough evidence. If anyone wants to look, it's there. So you ask, why don't they land on the White House lawn? Well, I think they have. I think it's just been covered up. And the reason why, now this is again the disclaimer going into my personal opinion, evidence to show this, but the reason why I think they're not landing on the White House lawn or doing more greater, bigger aerial shows so all of humanity can wake up in a second, is humanity's not ready for them. We sort of have to be collectively on this planet, have to be ready for them to accept them as being a reality. And if they were to prematurely show up without collective humanity sort of agreeing to that, then it creates also with extreme religious beliefs that would just completely destroy their paradigms. You have other people with other extremes who would probably start worshiping them like gods. And then there would be a whole kind of hierarchy, fear-based thing around them. And from my understanding and my downloads, my conversations, that's the last thing they want. They want to show up as equals to us, obviously superior in technology and in evolution and probably societal ways too, but not seeing us as inferior beings. We and them, as all of creation, have an equal amount of just being here and having our experience the way we're having it. So they don't see us as inferior in that sense, and trying to rape and pillage and take over. And then going back to the fact that if they were actually malevolent, because of all the evidence that shows of all the interactions that we've had, they would have already raped and pillaged and destroyed us and, totally taken over the planet if they truly were nefarious and had, evil intentions. So that's why I can say pretty confidently that though there may be some factions or some small groups that might be trying to do some bad things, the majority of the interactions that humanity is having and continue to have and probably will have are of a positive nature.
Well, you mentioned that there's a lot of disinformation going on. Is that primarily from the United States government standpoint, or are there other, I guess, parties involved that are kind of spreading that disinformation?
Well, I think it's that's a big question because there's so many parties involved, I believe. I think when we say U.S. government, we have to realize that the U.S. government isn't just, there's so many factions and aspects and groups and divisions, and we have the CIA, the NSA, the DOJ, the FBI, there's so many three-letter agencies in the U.S. government, and even within those agencies, there are different factions and groups and people that agree or disagree in so many different ways. So the government kind of lumps it all into one thing, thinking that they're all on the same page. And from my research and the evidence shows that they are not on the same page at all. There's a lot of infighting and different agendas and things going on. However, that being said, there has been evidence shows that there has been the U.S. has had more power and more of an influence on the ET subject matter than any other country. Even in other countries like Brazil, it's been reported that they, within a day or two of a crash or a sighting, U.S. military is showing up in Brazil for, retrieval or cleanup, which sort of, and that's one of many type of those events. So that sort of shows that, okay, I guess the U.S. is sort of playing or whatever faction that is that's doing that cleanup. I wouldn't say it's the military. I think it's beyond military. They seem to have military type personnel that they may be using, but I think those groups or those agencies are probably, they call them unacknowledged, that are classified. Even the Congress is not even allowed to see them. So I think these projects do exist. I think they do work under some sort of U.S. budget, and they tend to be the police agents of the world, sort of going around and working with other, local government groups that also might have their own secrecy and whatnot. And yeah, so I wish it was an easy answer to any of these questions, but you dive into this research and you go down some rabbit holes, and it's pretty deep.
Well, I think almost what you're describing, I mean, that sounds a little bit like what people might classify as the quote, like Illuminati, or basically the idea of the shadow
The deep
kind
state.
of, yeah, the deep state. And
Yeah.
actually interesting, the other day I was at a Gold's Gym, and they have a movie theater set up, and they were playing the first X-File movie from, whatever, 1998 or 99. And
Right.
there's that whole thing too, the whole shadow government in that movie. I mean, well, the whole X-Files,
Yeah.
the smoking man and the whole British English connection, and it's, that's the
Yeah.
quote, the people that are actually making things, they're kind of the ones that are behind everything. I mean, you still have, like you mentioned, the FBI, the CIA, all these organizations and, divisions of the, quote, U.S. government. And, but there still is that kind of the behind the scenes. And I don't know, interesting, you mentioned the deep state. And, like, it's just everything that's even going on now, where, even with the Trump administration, where it seems like it's not a monolith. Because if it was a monolith, if it was, all these factions are working together, then why would
Right.
there be so much infighting or fighting against Trump if he is a part of the
Yeah.
system? You know what I mean? And it's a very complex situation, it seems like, with that whole hierarchy of power.
It is, and the UFO reality is just one nugget of all of this. It's one piece. I think it's a large piece. It will become one of the larger pieces, but we kind of have to get everybody on the same page before we can, have contact. Because if, you have people, if they were to land here and say, hey, we're of the good, you're going to have some extremists that are like, you're a demon, and then, go commit some kind of jihad, run in with a bomb and blow them up and blow everybody else up. And we're not there yet. We can't force it, because, people have to accept things on their own terms. And I think that's what, my work is doing, and what other people are doing is, we're trying to just get this information out there and let people know and understand, okay, it's a reality, and it's just part of everything else. We just haven't been aware of it yet. So here we go. Let's dive in.
There was a famous ufologist who passed away earlier this year. I'm trying to think of what his name was. He kind of had a cowboy persona. He was an older guy, probably like late 70s, early 80s.
Well, Art Bell, who ran
there was Art Bell too.
Coast to Coast. There's Art Bell, and you're thinking of another one. I mean, a lot of these guys are getting up in years. I've seen 2 or 3 of colleagues pass away in the past few years, just because they, it's something, I guess, a younger generation like myself. There's a few. My buddy Jeremy Corbell's about to release a film on 9/11 about Skinwalker Ranch, which Bob Bigelow used to own, Bob Bigelow seems to be connected to the Harry Reid Pentagon project. They were giving him technologies to reverse engineer and do things with, and that's a big piece of this whole puzzle. But there's not a lot of young folks who, I guess, are driven to expose this stuff, where 20 years ago, when we were just finding 20, 30, 40 years ago, as we were uncovering the truths about the UFO stuff, these researchers were going deep down these rabbit holes, and many were taken out, and many are still in it and still trying to find the truths. And just, I think a lot of the younger cats, and and I'm getting up there in age too, but us younger cats who are diving into this material, you have to be really driven to go down these paths, because you're going to get ridiculed a lot less than before, but the status quo hasn't accepted these concepts and ideas and information, and it's becoming easier and easier, but it's still a dark and dirty path. That's all I can say. If you go down that path, and in the sense of the ridicule, in the sense of this is if you care about this stuff. See, I guess because I don't care, it doesn't bother me. But especially in the government side of things, you're going to go down some dark tunnels and uncover a lot of secrets and cover-ups and deaths, and it's not like that today. I think we can openly and freely talk about UFOs and not get axed. Whereas back in the day it was. So maybe I'm just saying these are probably all deterrents why people don't, younger crowds especially, don't go down this path, because it's not an easy one.
There's a quick comment I want to make, and then I have another question. I think
sure.
In regards to what you're talking about, that the less ridicule today, I feel like in today's society, I mean, for example, like this podcast is associated with my business, and I primarily work with businesses, so I do like marketing and press releases and things like that for companies' websites. And I feel like, especially to being right outside of LA, I feel like the greatest crime that people can necessarily commit in our society today, at least from a PR perspective, is having a difference of opinion. It's, if you go
right.
to San Francisco, you could be whatever kind of criminal that you are, maybe, the worst of the worst, you wouldn't be accepted. But you can live whatever kind of lifestyle you want or do whatever you want to, but if you were to walk around with a Trump hat in San Francisco or parts of LA, you would just, the
Right.
vitriolic hatred would be so immense. And I think that to a lesser extent, when you talk about, extraterrestrials or you talk about certain government conspiracies, I think that that crime is so much greater than anything that it's like on the physical outside or anything else that you can commit. It's that
Yeah.
you have a difference of opinion. And I feel like in today's world, it's so weird. You would think people would be more receptive of at least difference of opinions or on different issues. But really, honestly, it's like you're just, I mean, if you go into the wrong group of people, if they believe something different than you, I've had this happen in my own personal life, and it wasn't even that big of an issue, but there was a disagreement on a political issue, and it that ended the friendship. And I feel like, yeah, in today's world, it's weird that I don't know. I mean, I don't know how long it's necessarily been like this, but it just seems like in today, right now, that if you disagree, if you go against the grain on certain beliefs or on certain issues, it just seems like, the axe is dropped. Or it's okay, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to hear you out anymore.
Absolutely. And this is one of the key reasons why they haven't landed here yet, because it's obvious, on the surface we say, oh yeah, we're accepting and we're doing all this, but deep down within humanity's, psyche, obviously this is you hit the nail on the head. All of this hate towards Trump, all of this hate towards someone else who has a different idea or a belief system. And these are, I think, societal psyche things that we need to work through and uncover and work out before before the ETs land, because if the ETs land, and like I said, somebody's got an issue with it, they're they're going to get barked out off of the planet and yelled at or stone thrown or whatever it is. But yeah, it's something that we need to really work out. And I think that's what's happening. And I personally love Trump, not because, not of the guy who he is. I don't really know who he is, and I can't claim to say if he's a good guy or bad guy. I think judging from some of his tweets and responses on how he treats women, that's my personal judgment. Seems like he's probably not the best dude to hang around with. But personally, I think he's doing a great service to humanity by bringing up all of this stuff, stuff that we need to look at, people who you thought were the most peaceful, absolute peaceful people on the planet, and they're ready to go tear his head off and literally say, I want to kill you, or and you're like, what? Aren't these supposed to be peace-loving people and they have that much hate towards a dude? It's just a dude in the suit, sits in the Capitol, whatever, sits in Washington, D.C. So it's not, he's just a dude, Why are you letting it affect you so bad?
Well, I mean, I think that you're definitely right. I feel like, the federal government, the presidency, is so far removed from the average person's life. I mean, if you think about any city that you live in, you interact with, there's the city government, then there's the county government, then you have the state government.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many forms of government that directly impact people's lives before you get up to the president. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, granted, on a macro level, what the president does affect the country. But I mean, the president
Mm-hmm.
has no control over, a person. Typically, the president has no control over a person's job, if their relationship with their spouse is going well, if they have a bad relationship with their kid. I mean, it's not like,
Or like you just said, you're losing your friends over this stuff, which is absolute insanity. That we could possibly even lose a friend over a viewpoint of some dude in a suit. Yeah. That we just see on TV. It's absolutely insane that people are going to that extreme. But like I said, it's also a beautiful thing because it's showing us all the stuff that we need to work on as a society. That, we thought things were cool and we thought we'd be able to accept each other with different opinions and stuff. And he's just, we can talk about, gays and transgenders and different sexes and different ideas and belief systems and religious beliefs. And we're sort of gotten our way through that. But once it comes to politics, holy shit, man, don't you bring that shit up or you're going to get hammered. So I think it's just part of our evolution as a human species. Before we, and it seems so trivial. It's like, why are we even, getting angry over this stuff? But obviously it's a thing because, like you said, and I've had some very polarized conversations. I try not to take sides. But, I guess just like what our conversation now, I have somebody very anti that. Well, no, you don't understand. He's this, and America's going to turn into Nazi camps and all this stuff. And I'm like, show me the evidence. Show me the evidence, and then I'll get on board with that. But right now, you're just screaming like a lunatic, and I can't get on board. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, I 100% agree with you. You alluded to something that I've only heard a little bit about. I've seen some videos on YouTube with the titles of it, but I've never looked into it, and that's the Skinwalker Ranch. I'm not sure how big the story is, but would you mind just maybe...
It's about to be blown open. My buddy Jeremy, he's been the only journalist allowed into the property to date to film and do interviews. Well, it's in Utah. It's sort of on Native American property. It's been part of the Native American lore for a long time. And it's an area on the planet, and there's several of these, where the veil between dimensions is a little thin, and the creepy crawlies from one dimension can pop into the other and can do some harm or do positive stuff, and there's, I think, when it comes to Skinwalker Ranch, it may be more of a negative energy because of some of the negative things that have been reported there as far as deaths and missing people and different things like that, animal and cattle mutilations. So I'm really excited to see Jeremy because he hasn't even told me much about it. He's like, I can't talk about it until it comes out. I'm like, oh man. So, but it's coming out very soon. I think on 9/11 will be out on iTunes and all of the, I think maybe Netflix, or maybe that might be coming out later on Netflix, but definitely on iTunes and Vimeo and all those. But yeah, it's so Bob Bigelow and government officials, I think before Bigelow, and now it's in some others' private hands, but they have been researching the area. They've set up research facilities and sort of wait for these strange anomalies to happen. And they do happen. It's pretty, you can't predict exactly when, but there's lots of craziness that's been going on there. And Bigelow, through his scientist called NIDS, his scientific group that's been studying this stuff, got a lot of data, got a lot of information. I guess he got everything he needed to get. He pulled out, and now it's switched hands. It's in another person's ownership. But they've got full-on, military personnel there at that facility. Jeremy calls it, I don't know if he calls it, I guess the Area 51 for paranormal activity. And it's, I try to stay on the positive side of things, so I don't go deep into those worlds, but I absolutely accept it as a reality. And I think that these places, haunted places or, these kinds of things have keys to understanding our universe and to understanding the whole ET phenomenon. Like, I think it's all connected. It's all interconnected as far as dimensional doorways and these kinds of things.
So Skinwalker Ranch, it's more connected to, would you say it's more connected to extraterrestrials or more paranormal, quote unquote, where it's more demonic or ghost type activity?
The image of it is sort of ghost, demonic kind of energy is the from what I've heard, the accounts and stories. But I actually believe that they're one and the same. Saying when I say the ghost and ETs, we sort of put them in different camps. Like the ETs come from outer space. We know by Einstein's relativity that, and also the travel of speed of light. Like it's almost impossible for any of these other planetary beings to travel here. So I think as we get to understand how this works, that they're not actually from out there. They're actually just from another dimensional realm, another potential timeline probability in the quantum universe of infinite potentials. And in our star maps, that may be where it's how we perceive it from a 4D perspective. But when it comes to ghosts and how ghosts are able to traverse dimensions and come here and interact physically, I think that's the same mechanism that allows the ETs to come here as well. So my series that I'm doing now is called Interview with Ed, Extra Dimensionals. And during my interviews, I interview people who channel beings from other dimensional realms. And I sort of pursued the people who claim to channel ETs first. And then during the first interview, actually, they said, yeah, probably a better term would be EDs, extra dimensionals, because once you understand where we come from and how all the science behind it works, we're closer to that term than an actual extraterrestrial.
Mm. No, I mean,
I know this is going deep down the rabbit hole now, but yeah, this is my research and is sort of pointing this direction.
Okay. So was Jeremy, your friend, was he also involved in the ED program as well?
He's not with ED, but he is with. He was with me on the citizen hearing. He was the director for a project, which the funding has fallen through right now. We're still seeing if we can get it going, but yeah, he's director of the citizen hearing film version.
And you mentioned too, so for the Skinwalker Ranch, are there other? So there are other locations similar to that scattered across the planet, or at least in the United States. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you talk to any haunted structure or, different places. People have different names for them, ley lines or power spots or energy vortices. I think there's a whole slew of these areas all peppered all over the planet where continually strange things happen, right? Where people are like, whoa, I saw this or I saw that, and accounts of weirdness, whether it's an ET or some sort of plasma thing or some sort of, bright light or, missing time or whatever it is. But there's definitely a correlation between people's accounts and these areas. Skinwalker Ranch being one, Sedona, Arizona, different points, and we have all over from South America to, people even like where pyramids are built. People say they feel energy is different there. Something's going on. A lot of these holy places that are peppered around the planet, and people go on these crusades, and not crusades, but pilgrimages to get to this place, and then they find some sort of epiphany on the top of the mountain. A lot of that is because it's my belief that these areas hold the veil between dimensional realms is thin. So we, being human walking quantum computers, accessing other dimensions all the time, consciously and unconsciously, we can tap into these other realms, and it's just easier at some of these spots because of the veil is thin.
Wow. Reuben, that definitely, this is some really interesting stuff. I mean, I almost
we go from voiceover to go into a whole other thing.
No, I mean, this is definitely very fascinating. I mean, I certainly, if you're willing, I mean, I'd certainly love to have you on again and delve more into
Sure.
EDs, because I saw on your website you had a link of it, and at first I thought ED.
Right.
I never heard that term before. Obviously, I've heard of ET, extraterrestrial.
Right.
But no, this is definitely very fascinating. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I certainly, yeah. I mean, like I said, if you're open sometime to coming back on, I'd love to talk more about that. I don't necessarily know
Sure.
what your timetable's like because I know we've already gone almost an hour and 20 minutes long right now, so I don't want to
Yeah.
keep you necessarily any longer. But is there any ways? How can we follow your work online? Like, what are some? Yeah, I mean, like, can we follow you on Twitter? What's your
Yeah. Yeah.
URL for
Okay.
your website and
Uh,
stuff?
yeah. ReubenLangdon.com and Reuben Langdon, REUBEN, like the sandwich, and then Langdon, LANGDON. That sort of is the link for all my stuff. So if you go ReubenLangdon.com, you can scroll down and get to the citizen hearing, which is citizenhearing.org, and then interviewwithed.org. And then all my Twitter and all that stuff. It's all Reuben Langdon. My Facebook is Reuben Langdon. My Instagram is Reuben Langdon. So I do all the social media stuff and have fun with it. Usually I post, obviously keeping up with my career, I post the latest Ken Masters, The Devil May Cry, news. But I continuously post a lot of articles and talking points around the subjects like we've just been talking about. So yeah, so if I find evidence that proves that we are in a holographic universe, I'll definitely post an article on that, or the latest on time travel, how scientists have proven now that we can time travel. We just don't have the energy to do it, or all these particle accelerators, CERN, all of these kind of ideas and concepts of proving what reality really is.
I guess one last question for the road between Dante and Ken. Do you have a favorite between the two of them, and who do you think would win? I mean, they've probably been in crossover fighting games before, but who do you think would actually win in a fight?
Oh, that's so hard. Actually, I don't think they have been in any CrossFit. That'd be awesome to see.
Oh, they weren't in Marvel's Capcom 3?
Ken was not. Dante was. Ken was not.
How did they cut out Ken?
I know. I wish they would have had Ken, because then it would have been, I could have been Chris Redfield. I could have had my 3 team of Chris Redfield, Dante, and Ken, but no, they didn't have Ken.
Also, you do the voice of Chris Redfield as well for Resident Evil beginning at 5?
Not the voice. I did the motion. I've been doing the motion capture for Chris Redfield up until Resident Evil 6.
Oh, okay.
So from Code Veronica all the way up to 6, and then the film Vendetta that came out lately, and he'll pop in guest spots here and there. So usually they call me in to do the motion capture. I've been the physical motion capture movement guy for Chris Redfield for many years. But who would win? That's a tough one. I guess obviously Dante, because he's from half human, half demon, and can get his head cut off and basically still figure out a way to put it back on. But as far as favorites, it's a tough one because I grew up playing Street Fighter. I was an avid Street Fighter player, fan. Loved Ken Masters. He was my main guy. So I have sort of that personal connection with the character and just growing up over the years. But to play as just to have fun with, Dante's a fun character to play because he's just kind of a goofball and has. I mean, Ken too is lighthearted, but it's just a fun role to step into and just goof off and do, and like anything goes.
Yeah. No, I mean, for Street Fighter, I personally have a closer connection with that game because I remember as a kid, I have an older brother, and just watching him play it, play Street Fighter 2, and just like being immersed with Street Fighter for the past 20 years. It is such an iconic fighting just even iconic game franchise. Obviously Devil May Cry is as well, but like Street Fighter just, for myself personally, there's a necessarily a little greater, connection. One thing that surprised me about Ken, though, I read on his Wikipedia page is that he's only 5'9". I would have thought he was a little bigger.
Yeah, I saw that too. But then he's like very lightweight, but yet look at his muscle mass. It just doesn't match. His weight and his height doesn't match his physicality. You know, these are Capcom stats. Nobody really knew just when they were making this stuff up,
Well,
how it would actually work out.
well, I mean, in the past two games too, I mean, he's so muscled out. You've gotten the muscled out versions of these characters because even, Chris, the same thing, in Resident Evil 5,
Right, right.
he gained 50 pounds of muscle from the last entry of Resident
Yeah.
Evil he was in.
Yeah, it was fun trying to play with the muscle as far as when I walked and doing the physicality. So it was because I'm a pretty lean guy. I'm like more like Dante build or Chris Redfield in the Code Veronica series, old Chris Redfield before he got all jacked out. So it's fun playing those jacked out guys, and with the beauty of motion capture, we can do that. So I don't have to go shoot up on steroids and get a super huge to play a role. I can just do it. I can just act it. I can act big.
Nice. All right, Reuben. Well, definitely thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to talk again sometime in the future. And we wish you the best in all your endeavors.
All right. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Take care.
Take care.